Hello. So I'm going to talk a little bit about crowdfunding. I don't know how much people in the room know about it. So for some of you, this may be a bit familiar. For some of you, it may not. But basically, what we're trying to do is to improve a few key areas around which crowdfunding currently struggles. So, okay, this is actually taken from a talk that I did in Nairobi. I'd actually asked for those slides to be removed, but basically, it was talking about trying to build entrepreneurship in Africa and how crowdfunding can help. But broadly, the story is that crowdfunding at the moment is actually quite an expensive thing to do. So founders are asked normally to give over between 5 and 10% of what they raise. Typically, it's sort of these sorts of figures. So these are some of the largest crowdfunding platforms available at the moment. There are also payment fees as well. So those payment fees are things that backers need to contribute through things like Stripe. It's also relatively exclusive. So at the moment, if you, for example, Kickstarter operates in 20-odd countries. So crowdfunding isn't always going to be available around the world, which is actually not a very good thing when you think about how important it is. So the chief exec of PitchBook came through, I think, sometime in the last month or two, and said that VC funding was around about 84 billion last year. And crowdfunding was about 65. And I'll show you in a minute some graphs around growth in crowdfunding. So it's a vital thing to get this right. It is extremely important to get crowdfunding right, because over the next couple of years, it's going to exceed VC funding as how businesses typically get funded, and it could be so much more available. So why is it that crowdfunding is so expensive? Why is it that it's so exclusive? Why is it that people find it difficult to get onto these platforms? It's that crowdfunding itself isn't crowdfunded. Crowdfunding is actually funded in a very traditional way. It's funded by VCs and equity partners, and they want their money back, and they absolutely should. That's what they're there for. So that means that the platforms need to focus on where the profit's going to be. Is the profit going to be in a bunch of community enterprises? Probably not. Is it going to be in a cool tech raise? Probably is. It's going to be quite a lot more Western sort of centric, if you like. It's going to focus on where the profits are. So we think that shuts out a lot of community businesses. We think it actually speaks to speaks against the point of crowdfunding initially. And the point of crowdfunding initially, of course, was just if you can convince a bunch of people that your idea is a great idea, if you can convince them that they should come on board with you, convince them that they should be your customer, then why shouldn't your project have a life? Why shouldn't you be able to build it? So founders with great ideas face high fees, they face a low chance of acceptance, and they can very often face a requirement for existing traction. So we talked to quite a few accelerators, and I'll explain why a little bit later on. And they say that it can take up to $25,000 was one of the quotes that we got from an accelerator in Pakistan, just to prove to the platform itself that you've got a bunch of social traction, that they should invest in you in that rather narrow, limited shelf space way that a lot of the platforms look at crowdfunding. So we're going to change it by crowdfunding it. The market for this is huge. So we're basically running a token sale around the platform. I can explain a bit about that in a bit. So we're essentially crowdfunding. And it's not just that the market here, these figures are actually a little bit out of date. 2015 is the latest one. I'm trying to get some more recent figures about it. It's quite a difficult thing to do. But you can see that the actual acceleration of that graph, and it continues, the market's very, very large. The World Bank's and some very, very broad figures there talking about how big crowdfunding is likely to be. But I think we can all agree that it's going to overtake VC funding pretty soon. And actually, it's whether or not you think it's going to reach $1 trillion by 2025, it's certainly going to be the most significant form of funding. So from our point of view, this is kind of a disruptive idea. It's a similar way to, has everyone heard of the long tail? Put your hand up if you have heard of the long tail. Okay, not quite everyone. So the long tail is basically the idea. It's a Chris Anderson thing. And it's basically based on the idea that Amazon disrupted traditional retail, which it absolutely did, by basically focusing on the idea that we don't have to always go for these really expensive, heavily marketed things. So I don't know if does the pointy thing work? Can you even see it anyway? Maybe. So that bit at the beginning, there, this sort of hump of the long tail, the hump of the curve, that's basically traditional retail. You've got really limited shelf space. You've got to market the heck out of these products because you want to be the ones that everyone buys, because you've only got a certain amount of space in your shop, HMV and all of those other sort of Borders books, no longer with us for obvious reasons. They had this limited shelf space. What Amazon realized is people would buy actually the book by the person about the thing that nobody really cares about. I don't know, English people, British people may remember that Yellow Pages ad about guys trying to search around for fly fishing by J.R. Hartley, this book that he couldn't find anywhere. There'll always be someone looking for fly fishing by J.R. Hartley. And the number of those people looking for fly fishing by J.R. Hartley and cakes by Betty or whatever it is, will always, this longer bit, that tail that just goes on, just never goes to zero. There'll always be somebody looking for that. And the value under that curve is going to be worth a lot more than the value underneath the big, really expensive to produce, heavily marketed stump at the top. Now, as crowdfunding gets bigger and it starts to include developing countries much, much more, and it starts to become fit for purpose for community enterprises, not just these big heroic raises that you keep seeing on Facebook, creating a new way to stay wet, warm and dry while watching a kid playing football. It's brilliant, okay, well, or there are umbrellas, I suppose. But you've got these really heavily marketed things. Once it starts being much more inclusive, the value of that long tail, where all of this, or a lot of this growth is coming from community enterprises, from developing countries, from people who have better access or are getting better access, people who can just find a small community of backers near them, the area under that graph is going to be so much bigger. So actually creating services, actually creating a platform that works for those people is going to be a really enormous change within crowdfunding and therefore within the way that businesses get funded anyway. It's a very disruptive idea. It's similar, so it's essentially we're saying that the Internet of Value is providing in a similar way a disruptive change in the same way that just the original, that old Internet that we had did for retail. But that's not the whole story, because even if you can get onto these platforms, even if there's a platform that's suitable for you, you might still fail. Failure rates are far too high in crowdfunding, and they come across in a couple of key points. So the first point is the projects that actually fail to raise. So firstly, I've already spoken to you a moment ago about projects that can't even get onto a platform. You're not cool enough, you're not big enough, you don't have the traction, you can't even get on because you're in the wrong area and we don't really want you. What about the places that the people actually do get onto crowdfunding platforms then? They actually can fail too. And that's because if you're great at your cafe, your bakery, your beautiful kitchen gadget, your little tech gizmo, you're not necessarily good at crowdfunding. And why would you be? So actually, this requires quite a bit of skill for the founders themselves. Equally, then, what happens when actually you have got your funding? So you've got through that point where only 33% of crowdfunders are actually successful once they've got onto the platform at doing their raise. Then you've got the fact that 9% of them, once they have raised, don't actually fulfill and create a product. So this is what we're trying to do. So the platform itself basically aims to use partnerships, to use blockchain, and to use some existing tech to really add so much more value to the way that businesses can get funding through crowdfunding. So the first part is the onboarding and training. So we've been traveling around. We've gone to a lot of conferences, a little bit like this, accidentally showing slides from Nairobi, for example. Nairobi is a good case, actually, because over there actually is a really vibrant scene of accelerators. Everybody is really working hard to try and get people access to business. We've already heard some of the issues. So identity, what happens about identity, what happens about skill levels within the population. So how can we as an organization make sure that we're actually providing for those people, even though they don't necessarily have the skill levels? Well, the first thing we do is, while we'll accept any legal project, and we won't necessarily always accept every person first time round. You've got to potentially go through a training loop down here with an accelerator partner who's regionalized the platform. This isn't necessarily one-on-one training. It's just keep going through the training and keep making sure that you're actually a person who can run that. But we will provide that for you in that initial onboarding loop so you can create your project. The next stage, when it comes to project creation and delivery, is basically a crowdfunding engine. So what that speaks to is a marketplace of partners. You can see in the top right of the slide there. So we're creating essentially a crowdfunding engine. So what this means is you don't have to be great at crowdfunding. You can just post your face. Has anyone here tried to use Facebook Business Manager? Anyone? It's agonizing, isn't it? Absolutely agonizing. And we are marketers. We struggle with it. So it's just too sophisticated for a lot of people who actually just want to run a cafe, just want to make a shoe, just want to run a bakery. So by creating those APIs in a really simple to use platform, we can enormously impact on the success rates for crowdfunding. So that marketplace of APIs, our own services, where people can improve their delivery. And then the third thing is transparency. So trying to reduce that 9% failure rate, but also trying to offer more transparency for backers. And this means that transactions of how people have conducted their raise and how they conduct themselves once they have raised are going to be put into blockchain transactions that allow them to be transparent. So you as a community of backers perhaps can then say, well, okay, you haven't necessarily reached your milestone after tranche 1, but we can see how you acted and we're happy with that. So let's go on to tranche 2. So actually trying to build trust into the system, trying to build automation into the system and expertise into the system, trying to make availability and training into the system, not just from the point of view of actually can you get in there, will it even operate in your country, but can we add value in some simple automated ways that are genuinely going to have an impact on what will be the most common way and the most important way for small businesses to get funded. It's a little bit more detail about the marketplace there, but I'm aware that I'm sort of running out of time. But you can imagine how the marketplace can build into third-party providers that we can add into some of those APIs and some of those providers so you can sort of develop your crowdfunding in a more effective way. Revenue generating for us, we need to make money too, so our platform's completely free to use. I could talk to you a little bit more about those if you've got some questions, but essentially, by having a software as a service platform, a SaaS marketing platform in the center, we can actually lever some of our marketing projects. We can premiumize the platform. This will give us enormous amounts of data about how raises can be successful. It'll give us backer networks that we can access. It'll give us all sorts of value adds within the platform around data and effectiveness, as well as other support services. So I can talk to you a little bit more about backers in the questions, but I think at the moment, hopefully I've given you a reasonable flavor about what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it. That's us. Please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
I got a question. I have a question, sir. I have a question.
Hi. Okay, yeah, we got time for questions. But just before we go to questions, let me just say that, as you know, this is a subject very close to my heart.
Yeah.
And you got the book, right?
Yes.
Because I gave you it just now. And you'll find in there, those range of issues that you were talking about. And I find it tremendously exciting, I have to say, the approach that you're taking to start to tackle them. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions, but I just had to say that first. Gene.
Yes, I have a friend who tried to fund his Broadway show on Start Engine as an equity Reg CF raise. Can you do something for Reg CF, number one? Number two, he didn't have any money, so that's why he didn't have a marketing budget. Can you help somebody without a marketing budget?
Yeah. So the first part, no. The second part, yes. So we've gone to a lot of trouble. We're running an ICO ourselves. We spoke to some great guys this morning from Gibraltar. We're registered in Gibraltar, actually, one of the first. Even pre their DLT legislation, we went to Gibraltar. We knew regulation was coming up. So we've had approval from the Gibraltar regulators with a notice security. So that would become difficult for us to have equity raises on the platform. We're a reward crowdfunding platform. We can look at how we might be able to get more involved in equity later. If it were the case that somebody didn't have the resources to pay us directly and immediately, we can still take a percentage of the raise in the same way as the other platforms do. We would just exchange it for an enormous amount of value rather than just access. So it is the case that people can come to us without enormous marketing budgets, and we can still help. Of course, they would still need to pay Facebook or whichever platform they're going to do for advertising, potentially, but there would be ways that we could help them, absolutely, for sure, yes.
Questions? I've got one while we're waiting for the next one. Tell me about the Oak token.
Yeah.
Why would I buy the Oak token?
Sure.
And what will it give me?
So the Oak token, the way that we're tokenizing this is essentially we're pre-selling the access to the platform. So backers come in and back using Oak tokens. They can come out once they're successfully funded. They can come out in fiat, in Bitcoin, in ETH, in whatever they want to do. We have a liquidity fund that helps smooth out any structural problems within the platform because of that. But basically, there's a constraint from the point of view of a token. It's just a straight-up utility token, so it's a constrained supply, and obviously we're looking to build an enormous marketplace for that by providing funding to as many startups as we possibly can in a sustainable way.
And will it have liquidity? Will it?
Yeah,
if
so
you buy more than
basically
you need, will you be able to sell them again?
Yeah, so the liquidity from a token perspective and a platform perspective. So there are two different perspectives. From a platform perspective, you obviously back using Oak tokens. Those tokens go into the marketplace. Crowdfunding is a naturally expansive idea. So each founder will find new backers, and each of those backers will be an Oak token customer. So in that sense, it's a very expansive notion for a token economy, for a token market. Because we're clustering to a certain extent around accelerators, there is a local tokenomics thing as well. So you get clusters of backers, clusters of businesses, and so there's a local, very simple app that can be used that we're developing to transact between those. So there's a bit of a local flow, and there's a platform flow in terms of how the token moves around the system.
Okay, great. And a final question from the audience? If not, I'll ask you the question I asked someone earlier. What's the last thought? If people should remember just one thing from your contribution today, what should it be?
I suppose it should be just forget the token, forget everything else. Just remember genuinely disrupting the way that startups get funded, which is the biggest story, really, I think, that we are about.
Oh, wow, the right answer. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Lobbett.
Thanks very much.